I'm taking personal privilege. This is the only panel I'm introducing because it means a whole lot to me. First of all, Robin Forman, our provost, great mathematician, has been somebody who loves both the sciences and the humanities and has helped us put this on. I've been an admirer of Steve Johnson ever since he wrote a book about J.B. Priestley, who was called The Invention of Air, about oxygen. At the same time, I was doing Benjamin Franklin, who was Priestley's close friend. And the cool thing about Steve is that Google has now decided to create something which he'll describe to you, which is an artificial intelligence product that you get to put a notebook, and it trains on whatever you put in the notebook. This is the next advance we need, and what made it smart is that Google hired a real writer to do it. And Nick Mattei is one of my favorite people now because we co-teach a course in the digital revolution on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Nick makes them do Boolean algebra, and I tell them stories about Steve Jobs, but we have a good time. We did ask all of our students to come today, and I see one of them here. Two? All right, there you are, okay. Anyway, please welcome Robin Forman.
Thank you, Walter. By the way, before we get going with this panel, I just want to say this Bookfest has become the highlight of the year, I think, at Tulane in New Orleans. The fact that you're all here shows that you believe the same thing. And this doesn't get done without, I mean, there are a lot of people behind the scenes, hundreds of them, but it really requires someone with vision and passion to move it forward. And Walter's provided that vision and passion in droves. We wouldn't be here without him. So please join me in thanking Walter. It's been an incredible gift to this community. And Walter, I really appreciate your efforts here and in the classroom. I know you're only here to figure out who gets extra credit, but so I want to say that I'm really thrilled to be here with you all today. This is, even if it weren't for Bookfest, I can't imagine anything I'd rather be doing than talking about AI with these two fellows. Two of the most thoughtful, well-informed, most in-demand commentators about the past, present, and future of AI. And let me just tell you a little bit about them before we launch into conversation. Stephen Johnson here is the editorial director of Notebook LM and Google Labs, and is the best-selling author of 14 books on science, technology, and the history of innovation, including Where Good Ideas Come From, The Ghost Map, and his latest, The Infernal Machine. And I hope some of you were at his talk yesterday about that latest book. And also the co-creator and host of the Emmy-winning PBS BBC television series How We Got to Now and Extra Life, and is a contributing writer at the New York Times Magazine. And I just want to say yesterday's event highlighted that incredibly insightful about when he talks about technology and it's the way the conversation technology has with society, but it also, this latest book brings to the fore his remarkable skill at storytelling, which is wonderful. But I just want to say I became a fan of Stephen close to 25 years ago when I read a book called Emergence. Which changed the way I thought about the world. It's the story of the way large communities of simple things, and those simple things could be ants, they could be neurons, but when you get enough of them together, they can self-organize into systems which exhibit remarkable complexity and even intelligence. A topic that's not irrelevant to today's talk. And then I'm really thrilled to introduce my colleague Nicholas Mattei, an associate professor of computer science at Tulane University, co-director of the Tulane Center of Excellence for Community-Engaged AI. His research lies at the intersection of artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science, and the impacts of these technologies on society. He's the author of over 75 scientific papers and a co-author of the book Computing and Technology Ethics, Engaging Through Science Fiction, and this from MIT Press. Before joining Tulane, he worked at IBM Research, NASA, and the Australian Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization. I want to say, I'm surprised he accepted the invitation and he's not sick of me, because when Nick and I are often at various Tulane events together, and even if it has nothing to do with AI, I find an opportunity to corner him and pepper him with questions about the latest developments, so I'm surprised that you agreed voluntarily to have me do it again in public. But please join me in welcoming our panel. You know, in some ways, we don't have as much time as I'd love to explore, so I want to jump right into what some of the key issues are. And let's start with this idea of artificial intelligence as a tool for, or perhaps hinders to, human creativity. In some ways, human creativity is the way I always thought is like the essential nature of humanity and our role in the world. And yet now increasingly we're seeing AI used as a tool for efforts like yours. And so tell me a little bit about how you got involved in the Notebooks project and how you've been using it recently to carry out your work more effectively than before.
Yeah, well, what an honor to be on stage with you all, and thank you for that intro, Walter. This has been such a fantastic event. I've written a lot of books over the years, but through that period, I've always been very interested in using software and technology to help me with the writing and the research process. And so I've been an early adopter of a lot of different tools. When I would kind of gather research for the books, I would put them into, there was a program called Devon Think that was kind of a predecessor of what the language models are capable of now that would help me kind of organize the ideas. I use this program called Scrivener to write the books, which is a wonderful word processor designed for large book scale projects and stuff like that. And I'd always, so I was always interested in tools for thought, basically, the mechanisms we use going back to the pen and paper notebooks and the commonplace books of 18th century Enlightenment. And I'd written about this a little bit on the side. It shows up, this obsession with software and research shows up in a couple of my books, and I wrote a couple of articles and blog posts about it. And then about almost exactly 3 years ago, I wrote a piece, 10,000-word piece for the New York Times Magazine about the rise of these language models, focused on GPT-3, which was then kind of the state-of-the-art model from OpenAI. This is 6 months before the ChatGPT moment. And the piece was basically saying these language models have a lot of flaws, they hallucinate, they do a lot of things that are unpredictable, but on some level the computers are mastering language, and you can have a natural language conversation with a piece of software and it will respond to you in coherent sentences, and this is going to be a fundamental paradigm shift in the way that computers work. And we need to take it seriously. This is not hype, this is a big deal. And that piece was probably the most controversial piece I've ever written in my life. I got so much pushback. I mean, it's so, like, Twitter was just filled with people being like, oh, Johnson fell for the hype. It's so embarrassing. He's so naive, and I was just, it was very unpleasant. I'm very proud of that piece, but man, I did not enjoy its publication at all. But it turned out there were a couple of folks at Google, at a new division they'd created called Google Labs, Clay Bavor, who since left, and Josh Woodward, who now runs it. And they had been reading my stuff over the years and knew about my obsession with tools for thought. And they kind of, at some point, they read this article and they thought, I wonder if we could get Stephen to come to Google part-time and build this dream software research assistant that he's been chasing really his entire career, now powered by AI. And so they kind of cold emailed me out of the blue and said, hey, we've got this proposal, like, we'll give you a small team and you can build a prototype, kind of basically turning your research process into software. Would you want to do that? And like, because I'm not an idiot, I was like, yes, I would like to do that. And so I joined part-time. We built an early prototype in the fall of 2022, and it just kind of took off internally, and now we're here in 2025, and Notebook is, it's called Notebook LM. It's launched in 180 countries around the world. It's a significant part of Google's AI efforts. But that's how we got to it. Let me just say one or two quick things about how it works. So unlike a traditional ChatGPT-like model where you are talking to a kind of general purpose AI that has been trained on a huge amount of information and knows, a little about a lot of things. With Notebook LM, everything you do is grounded in the documents, we call them sources, that you give the model. So you define a notebook, and then you upload the documents that you're working on. So if you're researching a book, or you're trying to understand a couple of recent scientific papers, you would create a notebook, you add those documents to the notebook, and then at that point you can do lots of different things. You can turn them into quickly into a kind of a briefing doc or a study guide. You can engage in text chat, where you can ask questions about the documents, and the answers that the model gives back to you will restrict themselves to the facts in those documents, and it will give you citations for every factual statement the model makes so that you can see the original passage that the model used from the sources to answer the question, and you can read the original sources in the app itself. So you can click on a citation, go directly to the passage in the original source, so you can fact check or you can explore more. And so it's really a very, greatly reduces hallucination risk. It lets you personalize the model, and it just changes the way that, and the utility, I think, of AI. Last thing I'll say is we kind of had our viral moment, some people called it Google's ChatGPT moment, last fall because we released a feature called audio overviews. How many people have heard an audio overview? Yeah. So I'm going to just do a little stunt here. So what audio overviews does is instead of giving you a text document summarizing your sources or explaining your sources, it takes the sources you've uploaded and turns it into a remarkably lifelike podcast-style conversation between two AI hosts who discuss the interesting ideas, that kind of explain whatever you've uploaded in an engaging way that you can download and listen to in the car or at the gym. And so what I did this morning was I went into Notebook and I uploaded today's schedule for the book festival. And I created an audio overview based on that. I'm just going to play the first 20, 30 seconds of it.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. You're here because you want to get smart, fast on something interesting. And today, that something is the New Orleans Book Festival at Tulane. Specifically Saturday, March 29th, 2025.
It's going to be a fantastic day.
Think of this deep dive as like your curated cheat sheet to a day packed with brain food.
Yeah, we've sifted through that Saturday schedule, and it's like a literary and intellectual playground.
I love that.
And, the festival itself runs from Thursday to Saturday. So if you happen to be in New Orleans during that time, you should absolutely check out the full roster online. They've got all of the very...
So it goes on like that for 20 minutes, and they go through all of I could have fast-forwarded to our panel because it was on there somewhere. I don't know what they said about it, but and I don't believe that they're self-aware enough to know that they are actually inside Notebook LM that is being discussed at one of the panels. But so yeah, that's the backstory on Notebook.
Yeah, by the way, you should all play with Notebook. It's just a blast, and I'm an active user, and that podcast feature, as bizarre as it seems, sometimes I will give it very technical papers and create a podcast, and it's so engaging and inviting, and they discuss interesting examples, and it really it helps to give context, even if ultimately the goal is to read the paper. Yep. Nick, let me ask, before I frame the question is, does any of this concern you? And what I mean by that is, there are all kinds of ways AI is currently playing a tool in helping people write, to take one specific example, from spell checking to grammar checking to suggesting how to rewrite things to offering to write it to begin with. And where would, how much of that causes you concern? Where do you have a sense of where you would draw the line and say this is where we should be using it as a tool and this is where we might be hesitant?
That's a good question. I got to say, I used Notebook LLM this last week because I was on a research trip with some folks from Tulane, and I didn't know all of them, so I threw all their papers in and got my overview podcast for the flight down. I think one of the places where these tools have been great is in, I got to say, as someone who advises research students and things like that, a lot of them are English as a second language learners. It's really helped their writing to have that co-writer in a way that has been really different than I've seen in a long time, and brought them, I want to say, especially their writing and their ability to do technical communication in English to a level that usually takes a lot longer. And it's been really awesome to see that, and to see a lot more confidence in my students and the people that I work with for that. At a broad level, my background is mostly not with language. When I started working at IBM, and then when I've been here, it seems like language is where everyone wants to work now. Like we got to go into text. Because before, 2015, 2016, the text processing was pretty bad. Like it wasn't great. I remember yelling at Siri when Siri first came out, and it wasn't exactly the best version of it.
And it has not improved since then.
No, gotta say. And so on what we would normally call the symbolic side, right, where you have numbers and you have things that are not words. There's probably a line somewhere with how much information we gather from people. And I think when we've moved from sort of symbols symbols being, numerical and stuff like that, into the words, I think this is where folks get a lot more worried about things because they perceive it as I'm going to reveal my bias here, I think they perceive it as being more intelligent than maybe it is sometimes. Because I'm convinced of this, and I have this argument with Aaron Collada, who co-directs our center here with me, because he's a big language guy, about how if it wasn't symbols, if it wasn't words, then maybe we wouldn't worry about it so much. Because we, as people, right, I'm convinced my cat is talking to me most of the time, right? Like if it could just get the word out, it would have something smart to say. And so now I have this thing that's putting words back to me, and I'm convinced, and I'm not a neuroscientist, I don't know how this works, but I'm convinced that my brain is doing a lot of heavy lifting in anthropomorphizing that thing, giving it this idea of intelligence and giving it this idea of thought almost. And someone very smart, I'm not sure if it was Walter or somebody else, said to me, one of the things, again, with the words, is that for a long time in education especially, the writing and the words are the thinking, right? If you can express it in words, then it's sort of evidence that you've processed it and you can sort of think about it. And now with ChatGPT, in its most clear moments, or all of these LLMs in their most clear moments, is they sort of separate that, right? Now we can have words that go together really nicely with something that's not, sort of thinking underneath the hood. And that's I think where some of the unease comes from is how close it's getting to emulating, or at least for us, projecting the emulation of thought.
Yeah, I will tell you the one thing, and I'm an active user and a huge fan, and I was telling Steve, one of the things I use Notebook for is, I'm a researcher. I like to know when I'm studying some science, what comes next, what open problem might I contribute to. And so I often ask it, what are some of the open research questions that might follow this paper? And it does, I understand the mathematics of what it's doing, but I don't understand how it does such a remarkable job of imagining what the future of science might be and giving me some direction. So I'm a huge fan, but I will say the thing that gives me some reassurance is, and proves to me that they're not yet human in any way, is they're not funny, and they can't be funny. And I really do believe humor is one of the essential features of humanity, and I've tried all kinds of ways to get LLMs to be funny, and I've read papers, and some people say, what about this joke? And I'm sorry, that's not funny. I know you want to think of it, it's not. So
it's interesting you say that. So I think you're right. The one thing I would say, so when audio overviews first came out, so let me say two things. One is we spent a lot of time in the early days with Notebook. One of the things that I did kind of in my editorial capacity there is define a kind of house style for what the model should sound like when you chat with it. And one of my principles that we generally have stuck with is that the model should not pretend to be a person. So there are a bunch of chatbots out there that are kind of be like, hey, Stephen, how's it going today? How can I help you? Oh, I'm so sorry. I wasn't able to do that for you. I apologize. I was like, it shouldn't even have a first-person voice, right? It's not a sentient creature. It has no subjective interior life. Don't pretend that. Just give me the information I want. Don't try to be my friend, right? Audio over, and we have largely stuck to that. Once you switch into audio, you have to add those kind of human idiosyncrasies of the way that people engage in conversation. Nobody wants to listen to two Siris in conversation with each other. So it turns out the ear rejects robotic conversational speech. It's unlistenable. So you have to kind of create this illusion that there are two people if you want to have audio as a medium, which we thought we wanted to have. But with the humor side of it, I noticed when we first had the audio overviews that there was a lot of banter, and it was playful, but I was pointing out it was never funny, right? So there was always, it was light, but it was never funny. But the one thing that actually got them to be funny is someone created, I don't know if you've seen this, someone created an entirely fake scholarly paper that is formatted like it's straight out of Nature or something like that. And it has all the authors, and it's got footnotes and a bibliography at the end, and it's got charts and diagrams. So if you scan it, you might think it was a scholarly paper. The only thing that's different is that every single word in the paper is the word chicken. So it just says chicken, 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 chicken. The diagram is like chicken, 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 chicken. And they gave it to Notebook and had them generate a podcast on it. And it's online somewhere if you want to look it up. It is hilarious. And they kind of were like, we're going insane with all this chicken. We don't know what to do. And they make all these jokes about the chicken. So if you really get aggressive, you can maybe elicit some humor from them. But I agree, it's hard.
So before we leave this particular topic, I do want to follow up on Nick's comment about people think that the large language models are maybe exhibiting more general intelligence than they are. Some people view, artificial general intelligence as the goal of this current effort. Some people think it's something to be scared of. Where are you? I mean, should it be the goal? How close are we?
I'm ready for this question. The one I'm always ready for.
Yeah.
And when some of the students that are here have heard me, I'm very much a non-AGI person. I think artificial general intelligence, or AGI, as Turing first proposes it and all the stuff sort of in the history of the way where it comes from, is a great sort of like animating concept for the field, right? It's okay, we're gonna try to make something that's as smart as a person, and this comes from the Turing test and this idea of intelligence being something that's observable because you can't sort of test it directly. So if you can't tell the difference between a human and a chatbot, then it must be doing something that looks like thinking, right? And it's kind of interesting, the history of that, because that's why ChatGPT does all these things, right? It has a little bubble. It's not like it's sitting there typing words out. Like, it could just be there. It doesn't need to like have this sort of text thing that's trying to sort of give you the illusion of humanness. And I've always been sort of, AGI is a great animating concept, and for those of you who want to think about it, it's the idea that ChatGPT, eventually we can load that into a robot and it'll do your research paper, and then it'll get in the car, drive you home, and do your laundry, right? So it's all of the things that AI might do. And my argument's always been, and maybe it's the type of work that I've always done, is what we would call narrow or weak, somewhat derogatorily, AI, I think had a lot more impact on people's lives, because what that means is you're building models, you're building AI tools that do one thing and do one thing really well, right? They stack all the photos on your phone that have where your cats are sorted properly, right? They create podcasts of a certain format and style in sort of a restricted space because those are now actually interesting and engaging, right? They plot all your routes, they have traffic prediction, they do all of these very narrow tasks in a way much better than we could do them. They can play chess, they play Go, they do all of these things, right? But the thing that plays Go isn't gonna get in the car and drive me home. And I think we're so far away from things that can do that it obscures, how amazing some of these very narrow tools are and how much they've changed our lives. And I think that's more of the change that we should be thinking about, talking about, and maybe even worried about with some of the applications than that, all of a sudden this Terminator is going to show up and come after us. And the biggest thing for me, I don't know about you, in the last few years when I've been doing this, I'm just happy that the Terminator doesn't come up every single time I have to talk about AI.
Yeah, that has really changed. It's been interesting that way.
Yeah.
Maybe because the first generation of these chatbots are so friendly, no one knows that they no longer suspect that they're going to try and kill us. So that's very interesting, Nick. I mean, I think I guess the point where I would like maybe push for a more ambitious vision of what the models are capable of right now is, so we think of Notebook as a tool for understanding things. That's fundamentally what it is. If you want to understand recent scientific papers, if you want to understand a complex novel, if you want to understand your own journals better, you can put it in there, and Notebook will kind of adapt and explain and guide you through the material in whatever kind of form you want. And so to be clear, like, the problem with the word understanding is that up until the models came along, if you understood something, by definition, you were conscious and you were sentient, you were having an experience of understanding. And we now have, I would argue, an interesting state where something that is not conscious, is not aware, but is able to kind of perform understanding for you or help you understand something complex. And the best example of this, which actually connects back to Infernal Machine, this most recent book, at Google, we have what are called very long context models, which means that you can put a large amount of information effectively into the short-term memory of the model. That's what Notebook does. It does not train on your data. It does not take your data and put it into the general knowledge of the model. It's basically like it puts it into the short-term memory of the model. And when you're done, it kind of wipes it away, which is why you can have copywritten material in there and private information in there and feel secure about that. So before my book, Infernal Machine, came out, which is about 110,000 words, so it's a long block of text, I put it into Notebook LM. So Notebook LM has never kind of seen this text in any form. It's not in any of the training data. It's an historical story, but so the facts maybe are in its training data, but it had never seen this particular configuration before. And I asked it, I'm interested in the way that Johnson uses suspense in this novel. I would like you to point out 4 places where he alludes to some future event, but deliberately withholds information about that event to pique the reader's interest. And then explain what future event he's referring to in that passage. So to be able to answer that question, you really fundamentally have to understand the whole arc of the book itself. You're not just grabbing a specific fact from here or there. You have to understand, in a sense, the search query is what information is strategically not mentioned at various points in the book. And it just will nail that question perfectly. It picked out its first answer was absolutely the #1 point of suspense that I would have, as the human author, that I would have picked out myself, and it was able to point to the reference, implicit reference of something that happened 160 pages later in the book. And so that to me, I don't know how, I don't have another word for what the model is capable of doing there, except to say that on some level, in a non-sentient way, it is understanding the book that I wrote.
It's weird. I mean, well, first of all, have you taught undergraduates? Sorry, as a joke. I'm sorry. There's like 10 of them here now. They're all going to hate me. But I mean, that's been, I think, one of the biggest changes, and it gives this, I don't know if we want to keep calling it illusion, but we need another word besides understanding for it. It's these long context bits, right? And that's the biggest change, I think, from even 10 years ago, even still with ChatGPT or transformer-based models, because this has been out for a little while on the technical side. It's how much farther out we've been able to push what we call the context window of what is worth paying attention to. And the ability to do that in these large models. Because that was always the challenge, for the brief history lesson for people who might want it. Up until 2016, 2017, it was keeping all those words in sort of working, what we would call in a human, like working memory. And that was really the fundamental shift that happened between 2014 and 2016, was being able to make that bigger and bigger and bigger, and being able to attend to these things and be able to pick out the suspense. And I don't know what the answer is, but I like, it surprises me, I gotta say, on a regular basis.
Let me ask you a different question about understanding, and that's the role or importance of human understanding. There are increasing number and variety of settings where we're asking computers to give us answers, and accepting those answers without always understanding how those answers came into be. And maybe it doesn't matter. I mean, if you show a computer an X-ray and it says, I think you have cancer, maybe you don't need to know exactly what pixels it's looking at to make that determination. But nonetheless, I feel, I'm here kind of representing the human race here. I feel like it's important, right, that humans should understand and try to understand. And so much of, I would say, these large models are, for our purposes, a black box. So how do you think about the role of human understanding in our partnership with AI?
Well, I think that is exactly that principle, that human expertise and knowledge is an essential value that we want to preserve. That's like the founding principle of NotebookLM, right? That the idea is that you're not just talking to this general purpose model, you are taking the human knowledge that you consider important and that's relevant to you, and you're just, in a sense, you're using the model to translate it for you and make it accessible to you. But we spent a lot of time ensuring that those original texts are actually readable in the app. They're not just off in the soup somewhere. And I think that this is something we want to do more and more of. We think that it's actually a really powerful way to explore things like books, not necessarily narrative books where you would want to read them start to finish, but things like advice books or reference books or textbooks. To be able to have a kind of a conversational, exploratory dialogue about the text in question, to ask questions, to ask for follow-up clarifying questions, all that stuff that you would get from an advanced tutor in real life. That's very hard to get in real life because advanced tutors are expensive or hard to find. You now can have with the aid of this model. And I mean, I see it when I load up my own books in there and I'll just kind of explore it through this conversational interface. And it's a really fabulous way to move through a complex text because you can move at your own speed, you can dive into the areas that you find more interesting. Maybe you would then add some additional sources to help you explore the topic you uncovered reading the text in the first place. So there's a whole new set of ways of learning, I think, that are going to be possible with these tools if we design them in the right way and if we keep that kind of the emphasis on the original human knowledge.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I think when we talk about it a lot in my book as well, is where we're, this kind of the technophobic thing where it's like, oh, is this changing how we look and explore these complex texts? But when I was in school, it was called Wikipedia. That was going to be the death of writing, and everyone was going to copy Wikipedia pages and submit them. And I would argue that on some level, interlinking all that data, and then you have these this is older technology that everyone takes for granted now, but it was a different way to explore expertise, and people talked about going down Wikipedia holes for hours, right? And like talking, finding out more and more about little things. And now you have, with these LLMs that are able to pull together some of that data, someone to walk you through parts of that and explore. But I think you still, and you touched on it, and I think it's where humans still have a big role to play, is in picking those references. Yeah. It's gotten great at bigger contexts, but if you don't know how to ask the questions that you want, it still doesn't work that well. And my experience is a lot more around writing code. And I have a lot of students that use it to help write code, and we've been working with students in class to do that. But you can't just say, oh, build me a website that does X, right? You still have to understand the general structure of software, the general types of questions that you need to ask, and you'll be able to do sort of more targeted tasks. And I think that's the same way when you're exploring some of these books. You say, oh, what was this character's name and where did they appear, right? You still have to know how to ask those questions at a higher level. And maybe the context windows will get big enough to do that for us, but I don't know.
I will say, as much as I'm an optimist, in this particular topic, I am a pessimist. And I'll tell you why. It's because I'm a chess player. I love playing chess, and for long after the introduction of computers, people were trying to build a chess-playing computer, but humans were better than computers for decade after decade after decade. Then there was about a year where human and computer were better together than they were separate. I mean, they could work together and reach insights about a chess position that they couldn't reach. And that lasted for about a year, and now computers are so far ahead of humans that even if I had access to Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, I would still take the advice of a computer. So I do think that's a very fragile moment where we are true partners, and and the moment when we just delegate and say, look, I'm getting in the way here, you just do it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times people ask me about, here I'm using NotebookLM as a research tool, thinking about, how to organize the ideas and brainstorming ideas for whatever next book I end up writing. And there's inevitably this question of, at what point do you think you will just hit the, write Stephen Johnson's next book button and it'll output it? And that's a long way off. It's, I suppose, conceivable that would happen, but I feel pretty confident that for the next, 5 years at least, I'm just going to be, we'll see, I'm just going to be a better author and a more efficient author and a more creative author, and a lot of the friction and pain points of writing will go away. The other story that I think is relevant here is folks who wouldn't necessarily be authors, who nonetheless have a story to tell. So my dad, who's 87, co-founded a law firm in DC about 50 years ago. And they just brought him back. He's kind of an emeritus partner, but they brought him back to tell the story. There was a kind of contentious founding in this law firm. So they brought him back at a partner meeting to tell the story of this. And my mother sent me the Vimeo recording of his interview on the stage. And it's this transcript that Vimeo created. It's like the ugliest transcript you've ever seen. It's like every 6 words there's another timestamp, and everything is kind of misspelled, and there's the paragraph breaks are entirely random. And you really can't almost read it as a human reader. I fed it into Notebook, and I said, use the story here that is told in this transcript to write the opening chapter of Stan Johnson's autobiography in the style of a Michael Lewis bestseller. And in 20 seconds, it had written this amazing first draft of this that was really fluid. It was read really powerfully. And then it wasn't like that my dad was just going to stamp his approval on that, but it gave him something to edit. Mm-hmm. And I just suddenly thought, the world of people who have some kind of story to tell and want to explore that, but are never going to take the time or have the energy or maybe even have the writing skills to write a long book, but with a tool like that where they could just describe the story they want, and a tool like Notebook can turn it into something that is readable and shareable that might have 100 readers or 1,000 readers. I think that's widening the pool of people who can write a book, I think is another real opportunity here.
Yeah. I just want to change topics. I've been to several sessions, even some that had nothing to do with AI, but where AI was mentioned largely as a threat. The Terminator is
always a threat.
But let me ask, the excitement about a lot of AI, whether it's large language models or other things, is the personalized experience we're having, right? It's taking data about us, and it could just be recommending what movie we watch next or, what book we read, or it can be suggesting how we rewrite a speech to be more like ourselves based on everything we know. But in order to take full advantage of that, of course, then we have to share personal information with these machines so they know about us to create the personalized medicine, right? The protocol that it's best suited for our DNA. And I think it's one of the great tensions of our moment, right? That we have this tool that demands personal data while at the same time we're terrified about sharing it, and we're always trying to figure out where that line is. Can you help us think through this issue?
Oh, I mean, we've already lost on the personal data front. I'm gonna have to I'll take one shot at the places I used to be, and I think.
All right.
This is, I mean, I think I might rant here for a second, I'll try to keep it short. The value proposition of how much data you give up versus what you're getting back in return needs to be made more clear to so many users. Because at the end of the day, everything that's machine learning, right? Everything that's trained on data to predict new data is designed to be mostly right most of the time. And it wouldn't be mostly right most of the time if we weren't so predictable as people. I know that really hurts some folks, but if I know this is the joke I make to my students all the time. If your phone is playing Bob Marley and it's 1 a.m. and you're on a college campus, I don't need a whole lot of real smarts to start pushing you cookie and pizza ads. Like, it doesn't take that much work. And that's just a couple little data points, right? Of many, many, many that you're feeding all of the time. And part of the power, all of the power of these machine learning systems come from large, broad collections of data that sometimes we feel are more personal. So, where you are and your driving patterns and things like that all go into traffic predictions. And a lot of us get a lot of utility out of those traffic predictions. But do we really want Google or other places knowing where our car is all the time? And it's this, what are you giving up versus what you're getting? And I think that value proposition is not always obvious to the end users, and that's why people are uncomfortable with it, in my experience.
The one thing I would say, I think that's all absolutely right, but I do think that specifically with language models, and this is true of some of the other ones, but it's particularly true of the way that we've built Notebook, there's a really important technical distinction that needs to be broadly understood. We alluded to it before, but I think it's the part of AI that is least understood in the general public, that is so essential to actually working with it in a responsible way and in a way that secures the privacy of your own data. So there are two things that are happening with the model. There's a training process that goes on for months and months and months and months that large companies like Google or OpenAI do, where they ingest a huge amount of information and they turn the model into something that you can chat with that seems to understand a lot about the world and is fluent in all the world's languages and all the miraculous things that they do. Then there is this context window. And the context window is, again, like the short-term memory of the model, not its long-term memory, which is the training data. And if you put something in the context window of the model, it does not stay there. It is not trained. What we do with your data at Notebook.LM, we never train on your data in any form. We put it into the short-term memory of the model, and when you end the session, we wipe that information, and it's as if the model had never seen it again. And that has just been that is our it's kind of like our separation of church and state in a way, that personal data never gets into the training set. And we've been able to hold to that principle in part because we want people to be, people are putting their journals into Notebook.LM and then generating audio overviews to listen to the two hosts talk about their personal lives. Like, Stephen had a pretty rough February, but it's looking up in March now that he's here in New Orleans, And they apparently I'm not a journal writer, so I don't know this, but they get these interesting insights from, in a sense, having these, third parties talking about their own inner lives. But if we didn't have that kind of church and state separation between short-term context and long-term training, that wouldn't be an ethical way to deploy.
Right, and that's what I mean by making that value proposition more clear, because I know Notebook LLM's got some very clear policies around that, but not all of the LLMs you use do. And a lot of them, anything you type into that box is now possibly going to be part of the training data. And then even in a larger context, what goes in, I mean, Aaron, another professor here, and I wrote a whole paper just trying to figure out what was the original data that goes into the models. Is it New York Times? Is it Wikipedia? Is it anything? And unfortunately, that is still completely opaque for everyone. I'm going to take a shot at all of them right now. That's why I come back to academia. I can say things. But but I think, and that's why I think Notebook LLM is really great, because you clarify and make very clear that there are things that aren't going to be sort of taken from you, right? And I think that makes it much more trustworthy.
So in this area, I think there's often a question about what role should government play in creating guardrails or regulations around this. And I think that's an interesting question, because I think a lot of artificial intelligence is growing in response to market forces. People who are developing, I'd like to think everyone at Google is well-intentioned, but people are developing these tools not to make the world a better place necessarily, but to generate profit. And so you mentioned in passing recommender systems, right? If you like this or you're doing this, you'll like this. And this has come up in other sessions, right? If you buy a book from Amazon that's on the left or right or whatever of some issue, it says if you read this, you might like to read this. It never says you read something on the left, you might want to read something on the right. It says if you read this on the left, you might want to read this a little further to the left. And I would say YouTube is the best at that, right? We've all gone down rabbit holes on YouTube. You start out with an innocent video about something. Before you know it, it's in the craziest conspiracy theory. And but that's a natural consequence of their goal is to keep you engaged, as opposed, and it's led to, I think it's been one element of many that has led to the polarization of our society, and so there's a lot at stake. So on the other hand, I'll just say, I don't trust government to be thoughtful about how they might regulate these things, so how do we construct guardrails and enforce transparency that allows people to make thoughtful decisions about how they are going to use these tools in their own lives?
This came up in the panel yesterday with Nate Silver and Canaletta and Molly that was talking about algorithms, like recommendation algorithms, that we do not have enough visibility into the algorithms that we use to recommend things to ourselves. And there's definitely been an argument that we should both kind of expose the logic of the algorithms and give people more options. There is an open question in my mind whether if you created a diversify my point of view algorithm that was an option that people could have on Facebook or on Amazon, whether people would actually choose that. Right?
The answer is no. We have a whole grant on this. We've done a whole we have a whole bunch of work on this. But
but there is an argument potentially that you would, as a societal good, one would want to have algorithms like that because you get better ultimate outcomes if people are exposed to different points of view and things like that. There is also some research, by the way, that social media, heavy social media consumers are actually exposed to more diverse positions than people who just read, or just watch television news or watch other things. In fact, one way to think about this is if social media were just about echo chambers, then the general characteristic of social media would be everybody just agreeing with everybody else. And I don't know if you've been on social media, but that is not what happens. In fact, social media ends up actually, you suddenly start caring about people and having contact with people who you would have never encountered before and getting enraged by those people because they're doing different things from your point of view. So I think actually the filter bubble echo chamber critique of social media has actually been, it is a polarizing force, but not because it's putting people into echo chambers. It's actually polarizing because it's exposing people to different points of view, and that actually enrages people, it turns out. Anyhow, that's my rant.
I generally agree with that too. I always make this argument. Walter's gone to do another panel, but one of the things we talked about in class is you can build your own echo chamber before social media. It's called whatever club that you belong to, where everyone's got a membership fee of some sort. But in a broader sense, I think the recommender systems is a really understudied place, and one of the things that we've been doing with the Center for Community Engaged AI is looking at what we call in a very nerdy way this sort of idea of post-userist recommender systems. Because the idea in a recommender system, and Robin alluded to it, is that I want to give you the things that you are most likely to engage with, right? The things that by observation you're most likely to click on, most likely to watch, most likely to purchase, whatever that goal is. And my co-author on some of this work, his name is Robin, which is kind of funny, he phrases it this way, which I think is a great way to think about responsibility, and especially maybe corporate responsibility in some of these places. So with something like Notebook LLM, or even for music recommendation, it's possible that I can generate music that you are more likely to click on, that involves no human beings whatsoever, right? So now I'm Spotify. I don't have to pay royalties on this because it's generated music. And from my interactions with you, I know this is really making you happy, and you keep listening to it. Does this bother anyone? That now I can figure out what you like, generate it without a human, and then serve it to you, all without any human being being involved. And I think this is where people start to get a little concerned, right? Because you would think of something like Spotify or like Notebook LLM or these platforms as helping you do discovery, as helping you find things that you're interested in, and having really a responsibility not only to you as a user of the platform, but also the marketplace of the writers and the authors and the music. What is those platforms' responsibility in a more broad sense, like opening the window of what we're designing for? And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. I don't have good answers. Again, this is also why I left industry. Now I don't have to take answers. I just sit here and ask questions about it.
They're great questions, and that's like part of one of the things I'm really focused on this year is making it easier for people to purchase things and explore those things that they purchased inside of tools like Notebook LM with the proper rights protections built in, so that if you buy, say, a book and read it inside of Notebook LM and then share that notebook with someone else, they aren't able to read the book. It's not a piracy vector. Because we're right now in a situation where it's like, it's very hard to get material that you've purchased into these tools. And so maybe, yeah, and so it may be in a world where, you could generate music that was that good. Like if it was very hard to actually purchase music and it was just easier to generate your own music, people would opt for that. But if you make it easy for people to pay for things and pay for that human expertise and just have that experience of consuming that expertise be enhanced by AI, that's the future I think we should be steering towards.
Yeah. Let me ask, we're running out of time, and I want to ask one question that I get asked often, and we have a lot of students in the room, so I want to ask it on their behalf. What should they be doing to prepare themselves to be leaders in the future? Which industries, which professions? Do you think, which ones will be gone in 10 years as human activities, and which ones will be thriving? Any insights?
I just know I'm always bad at this game, but I love technology. I love building these things.
By the way, we're going to meet again 10 years to today.
Oh, we're going to write it down. And so I still push, and this is one of the reasons why I think the class with Walter has been so much fun, is still exposing people to more and more programming. I know there's all this death of programming stuff out there, but
there was an article I read recently that the hottest new programming language is English.
Yeah. And I think that's really cool, but it's not just straight English. It's knowing how to work that and knowing how software is designed. And I think hopefully what's going to happen, this is my prediction, is like all these other, since we stopped plugging things in and writing, punch tapes in binary, which was also programming, we're programming in different languages. And it's going to expand the space where we can use these tools, where we can use software, where we can use AI to do all these things. And so I'm still very pro, take your programming class. You have to sit there and get yelled at about Python just to understand the ways that these things are expressed. And I don't think that's going to go away, but I might be a little biased, just a touch.
Real quick, I think that there's a bit of a revenge of the humanities thing that is happening with some of these language models. And when Google brought me in, we didn't think about this, but it turned out, particularly in the early days, in order to get the models to do what you wanted, it didn't really matter if you had C++ or JavaScript skills. What mattered was that you had command of clear, persuasive, communicative English prose, or prose in general. And so those kind of writing skills, actually, that's why English is the hot programming language, right? So you have to be able to think about what you want the model to do and express that in complete sentences and cogent sentences and explore in a conversational mode. And so I think that writing, while computers and software and LLMs are going to help us with our writing and maybe sometimes do writing for us, having those skills are going to be increasingly important.
Yeah. Well, as promised, I think we had exactly the right panel here for this conversation. So please join me in thanking Stephen and Nick. Thank you.